Welcome to another episode of MTRCB UNCUT. I am your host, Chairwoman Rachel Arenas. The pandemic forced us to change the way we live. It changed the way we work, learn, and interact with people. The virus also changed the way we consume content. When cinemas were forced to close during the lockdown, local content was scarce, but the demand for online streaming services surged. Today, we will be having an open discussion with a representative from the Asia Video Industry Association, or AVIA, to know the latest about your favorite streaming sites in this new normal. Just for everyone's information, AVIA is the trade association for video industry and ecosystem in Asia Pacific. Some of their members are Netflix, Disney, View, Sony Pictures, and Filipino streaming sites like Signal, ABS-CBN, and Globe. Join me in welcoming on our show today, all the way from Hong Kong, Mr. John Medeiros. Did I pronounce it correct? Chief Policy Officer of AVIA. Welcome, John.
That's quite right, and thank you for that warm welcome. Believe me, I wish I could be with you in Manila, but in today's environment, that's not possible. So glad we could connect this way.
And thank you, really, thank you for your time. You know, we have a lot of questions, and the first is, can you tell us when video on demand started in the ASEAN region and also in the Philippines?
So the first video on demand in Asia began about the turn of the century, which sounds like a long time ago, but it was about 20 years ago.
Oh.
And VOD began on cable TV networks. The cable networks were upgrading from old analog transmission to modern digital transmission systems, and the digital cable allowed the companies to stream videos on demand to their customers. So they started doing that. Sky Cable was the pioneer in the Philippines in doing that, and that was about 2006. They started streaming VOD to their customers. Also in 2006, Google bought the YouTube platform, and that began huge international growth on the back of internet rollouts, broadband rollouts, which were not even within countries or among countries in Asia. Obviously, you had small city markets like Singapore and Hong Kong that became broadband wired very early on, and people started watching YouTube and other sort of internet-based services. It followed in the big cities of Southeast Asia, well, certainly in Japan and Korea too, I shouldn't leave them out. In Southeast Asia, it followed in the big cities in Manila, Bangkok, even Jakarta. The urban residents were the first to have access to this. But the rollout continued, and increasing portions of the populations all over Asia have been able to receive broadband signals. With the arrival of 4G telephony, many hundreds of millions of people who might not have had broadband access at home suddenly got broadband access in their hands. And it's capable, you know, 4G is capable of transmitting TV streams, and people have used it that way. People tried with 3G, not really very adequate. I used to try, and it wasn't good at all. 5G is coming. So it's that technical development, the development of the internet infrastructure, both wired and wireless, that have brought about the development of the streaming TV industry. It was in about 2015 that the first standalone curated streaming VOD services arrived, and that the examples of that are the names I think everybody knows: Netflix, View, iFlix, Tribe, Hook, HBO Go, NBA League Pass. They all started actively operating in Asia around about 2015, 2016. Netflix came in 2016. Some of those players, including Netflix and iWant in the Philippines, began producing some content expressly for their online VOD services. So that was a difference from the cable companies. The cable companies just transmitted movies that were made somewhere else. But now you have services that are investing in content beginning around 2016 and ramping up in the last couple of years. Now, since 2016, and so that's only 5 years. This industry has only existed for 5 years. And since then, it's been undergoing a great amount of movement and change as companies have tried to find the right combination of subscriptions, advertising, cross-promotion, bundled services to make to monetize their offer to consumer and make their services successful. Not all have succeeded. Hook and Tribe have disappeared. Z5 from India and WeTV from China have arrived in the rest of Asia. iQIYI is coming soon to the Philippines, I read. Signal and Globe have established their own streaming services, which have been very successful. iWant has integrated itself with the Filipino channel overseas, and that is probably identified by most of the world as the Filipino streaming service.
Actually, that's true, yes.
So that bubbling and change in the industry, I would expect to continue because this is not an industry that has sorted itself out yet. It continues to be disrupted and changed.
You know, John, the video on demand really changed the landscape of the industry all over.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. And it's produced many new opportunities for content producers in Asia. And if we want to talk about the Philippines, for Pinoy content, the door is now open to some of the creative geniuses who have been limited to single markets in the past. But it's now open for them to tap international markets in ways that were never possible in the past. Whether we're talking about the curated service like Netflix and Disney coming soon, which will be buying lots of local content and then commercializing it globally, or through YouTube, which is not a curated service, but it is a service that has huge reach. And brings potential markets for content producers very, very close to them. I have been very impressed by the speed with which content producers in Korea, Thailand, and now in the Philippines have been able to tap these new commercial opportunities.
Actually, the iWant is really like they've been launching new content one after the other. I mean, especially, of course, during the pandemic and, of course, after the close down of the network.
Right.
And I believe that it has been really they've been actually really building their content. It's not just really now, but they've been building it slowly. You know, initially when we wanted to have a meeting with you, initially about 2-3 years ago, I said maybe we should ask the video on demand players to include the Filipino titles, you know, in their content. But you know, lo and behold, now it's really there's so much Filipino titles already.
It's true.
Yes.
I will confess that I subscribed a month ago to iWant because there were some shows I wanted to watch that, you know, I don't believe in pirating content, so I don't go out and just look anywhere if it's legally available. And frankly, you know, compared to developed country services that I also subscribe to, it's good value for money, put it that way. It's quite moderate cost. So
when you launched your services in the Philippines, were there some challenges you encountered?
Well, the challenges for this industry, okay, the biggest one is connectivity.
Yes.
You know, it at first, and still in the Philippines, it's a Manila-centric market, maybe some other cities, but it's really rather patchy depending on people's access to good broadband connections. So we are in a symbiotic relationship with the telcos. We need audiences that can access the content, and the telcos need a compelling product to attract consumers to their networks. You know, this should be a marriage made in heaven. Sometimes it is, but not always. Another challenge has been the COVID pandemic. That's been huge in the last year. You know, you mentioned quite rightly that consumption, online consumption of video has skyrocketed. But there have been other effects that are really destabilizing. So we're part of a bigger broadcasting industry. And in that industry, the first thing that happened in the first half of 2020 was that ad revenues dropped off a cliff. And that damaged all of the terrestrial broadcasters who were an important part of the ecosystem.
Mhm.
It damaged services that were advertising based on the internet
Mhm.
as well. Now that has come back.
I mean, it's back to how it was before or even more, I guess.
I think the digital advertising is even more.
Hmm.
I think that has come back in a big way. I'm not sure that, you have to ask the terrestrial TV channels. I don't have their data, but, they've had a tough row to hoe in attracting advertising dollars. So you get this volatility that is a challenge, and it's COVID-induced volatility. One other aspect, which really surprised me, I just learned it when I was researching to talk with you today, is that the number of mobile telephone connections in the Philippines has dropped about 20% in the last year. And it's because of this is a third order effect. It's because people don't have the money. COVID has damaged the economy.
Oh,
People
yes.
don't have as much money. They're dropping their consumption.
Yes.
And so all of these forces are a challenge for us. I think one other challenge I would mention is content quality. And this in particular, if I zoom out and look at Asia as a whole, the first wave of curated online services were heavily dependent on existing media catalogs. That was what HBO had and Netflix acquired. This was plenty of high quality content, but now with demand so high and with the industry becoming more, as the network spread out, the industry and its consumers are more representative of Asian realities and societies in Asian countries, in not only North Asia, but Southeast Asia. What we encounter in many countries is an inability to supply all the all the content that their own consumers need and desire.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm talking about places like Myanmar and Vietnam,
what do you mean, John? I mean, what do you mean that the problem is how to, give them the content that they need? I mean, is it what you said, John?
People like to see their own
Culture
society
or their yes.
So if you're a consumer I started to say about Myanmar and Vietnam,
mm-hmm.
You want to see
the life in
Burmese people or Vietnamese people.
Yes.
Hollywood productions are great, but that's not all you want to watch.
Correct.
And filling that demand niche is a challenge, of course, for the domestic operators, but also for the international operators. If you want to market a service, you've got to give people a variety of content they want to watch. And so in the Philippines, this is actually not as big a problem because you actually have an indigenous video content industry, which is pretty good. And it makes some really good content, which, as I said earlier, is going global. But in other countries like Myanmar and Vietnam, where they never actually even had private broadcasters until recently, they had state broadcasters which responded to, instructions from the party rather than consumer demand. And suddenly this industry, our industry, has to meet consumer demand. And that production capability just isn't there. And so we are reaching out to various players in countries like that to try to work with them and help them upgrade their production so that first of all, they can appeal more to their own market. And secondly, even produce content that can be marketed around the world. And there have been some examples of that, but we'd like to see more. So those are some of the challenges that we faced.
But John, you're correct. In the Philippines, it's not actually a problem to give them content that would just show the realities of the country, because basically the Filipinos really watch anything that interests them. Like there was a time the Filipinos were really into Korean, and now they're really looking into the Chinese telenovela series and Japanese, you know. So you're correct that the Filipinos really don't have much of the problem. And also I wanted to mention, John, you know, when the pandemic started, because everybody was home, so like people were scared that the internet would bug down because everybody was on,
Yeah.
you know, everybody was on video on demand. But you know, thank God it didn't. And I think now that's the concentration of the government, which the president mentioned, to, you know, for all the telcos to make sure that the digital infrastructure is in place.
And that same infrastructure, of course, it's used from 9 to 5, so to speak, for people to do business. You know,
Yes.
we are talking on the same infrastructure that, you know, in the evening I watch. I mean, I watch my own selection of videos. So I think governments are recognizing that we knew where the world was going back in 2019. I think we all knew, but we didn't realize it was going to move so fast. And in 2020, the digital push has been so big.
And you know, John, I'm just surprised because, you know, after being home months, you know, working in the mornings till afternoons and like really just on VOD the rest of the night till morning, you know, I'm sure this is what others felt also the past months, that, oh my gosh, there's no more content by next year. But we're surprised because there's more and more.
Yeah, this is Say's law. Demand creates its own supply. But in this industry, I think it's really true. But you had people, you know, who in the production industry who were amazingly frustrated in the early part of 2020 because production was also restricted or blocked in many places. And I think we've gotten past that stage now. What I see is new productions being made and coming out in the last part of 2020
Yes.
and up to
Yeah.
now.
And I think, John, because you know, even in, you know, and not just in this industry, but everybody was just shocked because we never experienced this before. So everybody was on pause for so many months.
Yeah.
But now that they're getting used to the new normal, then everybody's sort of going back to business already, you know. But you know, let me go. People are asking the organization AVIA. What prompted you to create this organization, and how fast is how fast is the organization growing?
Well, we have existed as an organization for several decades, but not in our current form. Our previous incarnation was as the Cable and Satellite Broadcasting Association of Asia. And in that regard, you know, we were and are a Hong Kong based, we also have an office in Singapore now, but we're based in single places, and we work in 17 different countries and regions in Asia. So we were focused for the first couple of decades on video as delivered through cable and satellite broadcasting. In other words, the so-called pay TV systems. By 2017, 2018, it was becoming obvious to everybody what the trend was in media consumption. As I said, we all knew where the industry was going. We just didn't know how fast it was going to go. And so we changed our name in 2018 to encompass all video. And that way, companies like iWant or True Digital in Thailand or Netflix, you know, these are companies that are native to online content supply. Of course, iWant was part of a larger company that also had more traditional broadcasting, but we wanted to attract those people into the association so that we could begin dealing with what we saw as the future issues that we're developing. So we became AVIA in 2018. And we are still very interested, and we still focus to a great degree on cable and satellite, because if you look around Asia, there's hundreds of millions of people who continue to get their TV that way. And, that's going to change, but only slowly. But at the same time, we believe as an association, we need to be, have a big tent and be more all encompassing of where the industry is going.
That's correct. My next question is really a personal concern. So you created a self-regulatory content code to make sure that your platform is free from inappropriate content. Can you tell us more about this process and how does it work?
Sure. We don't call it a content code. That's the first thing I would say, because I think in everybody's mind, a code is something that is very detailed and specific. And as an association, we don't think it's our role to get down to that level of specificity. That's really what each of the companies does for themselves. But so the what we call our governance framework, the framework is designed to be a top level set of commitments by the industry to producing and distributing content that meets the expectations of Asian societies. And it's not the same from one country to another. And that is how we view our governance framework. We are the part of the video industry. We call it the online curated content industry. We call it OCC. That's part of a bigger group of industries, which are frequently called OTT, which is a kind of a silly acronym standing for over the top. But there's many different kinds of services delivered over the internet, and curated services like ours are only one. You have user-generated services, you have social media services, you have pirate services, that are also delivering people content over the internet. So we view our part as having a particular interest in providing really a safe level of service for consumers. The internet has an awful lot of stuff, and not all of it is safe for children or even for adults to watch. So the governance framework is designed to encompass commitments by the curated content industry to create a safe environment in accordance with what our consumers tell us they want. And this is something that is really striking. As commercial operators, the companies want to go where their consumers are, which means they go online, first of all. But we've done some surveys, and we did one last fall, which covered 5 countries in Southeast Asia, and one was the Philippines. And we found very large majority of consumers. These were online surveys, so it's people who are talking about the online video environment rather than traditional broadcasting, that sort of thing. They told us 60% of them said, of Filipinos, said that they regarded streaming services as safer than social media videos, and 65% they were safer than piracy websites. Well, that's good. That's the right brand for us to have. And we asked, if you watch streaming services, what matters to you? And more than 75% said they wanted parental controls or other kinds of content filters that they could use to set the standards for themselves and their families. And they also wanted the information to allow themselves to make wise choices in that regard. So more than 70% of Filipinos said that content advisories or ratings are important, so that a consumer knows, rather than just looking at the thumbnail pic, that he or she knows what's inside the content and what they're actually choosing for themselves or their families. And those numbers, frankly, were striking to us because they were such big majorities. And we compare it with things like in the same survey, the same question, what's important to you? And we gave people the option of talking about good customer care procedures so they could contact the company. Well, only 40% of people said that was important. So the ones who were focused on individual control and family and parental controls for families were way above that. So it's clear that consumers in Southeast Asia, all these countries are in Southeast Asia, and specifically in the Philippines, want to make these decisions themselves. They want to be empowered, and that's our goal, and that's the goal of our framework to help point the industry in the right direction of empowering consumers, of providing parental control systems, of providing very good information, advisories, ratings in keeping with local standards, those sorts of things, so that consumers feel comfortable with their ability to make content choices in the streaming environment.
John,
Yeah.
so your rating system was agreed by all VOD and OTTs. I mean, like, is it just one standard rating system for all the online content providers?
It can't be, because we're operating in many different countries. So
yes, okay.
Each company will have its own standards and practices.
Mhm.
What we are saying is that not you have to have a standard and here are the standards. What we're saying is you need to have a standard. You need to have program ratings. You need to make these available to people, whatever your source for the ratings are, because in some countries, ratings will be, in Thailand, I see Thai content, which, they have these Thai letters, the Thai alphabet. It's not comprehensible to me or to most Filipinos, I'm sure. So the system in each place is going to be a little bit different, and it'll be implemented by the individual companies.
So I can conclude that you also, I mean, we've talked about this before, that you adjust also to the culture of the country where the content providers are, and you follow a certain rating system depending on the country, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right. I mean, the local, again, it's not me who's doing it. It's not
yes,
the association, but the
yes.
companies will take reference from the local systems in designing their policies for each country. And we want, therefore, to have a good dialogue with the governments.
Actually,
in order to sort of, this is not a finished product. This industry is not a finished product. We've only been around for 5 years in this form.
yeah.
We view this as an evolutionary process, and then we think it's important that governments and industry work together in this regard.
Correct. I agree. I mentioned it, John, because earlier this year we had sort of quite a controversy here in the country, because we were, I told them that we have a working draft, as we have talked with the association before, and the content providers, and that we have what do you call this? The working draft will be given to our stakeholders, that we're not going to, that the online providers will just align to the rating systems. We will not, our rating system, we're not going to review all the content, because we can't possibly do that. And it's not just us, but in other countries as well. So I told them that in fairness to the video on demand providers or OTT or content providers, are actually, like you said, willing to work with us. And I want to just thank you again for that, because a lot of people reacted and said, oh my God, we can't watch our Korean telenovelas anymore because the agency or the government is going to censor it. It's we've already passed that. It's a different generation now. I mean,
I would agree with that
yes,
completely, 100%, 200%. What we want is for governments to collaborate with the industry
Correct.
on
I agree.
assessing and evolving approaches to these issues online. Because look,
Yes.
anybody who looks at content on the internet knows there are risks, there are problems. We don't want to, we, the curated industry, want to
Yes.
be better than that.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to work with the governments. And as a start, we'd like to see, regular consultations between industry and government. And it's got to be on a country by country basis, right? We are regional, maybe even global in the case of
Mm-hmm.
some of the services,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not the way markets are set up, and it's not the way regulations have been set up.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's going to have to be on a country by country basis, but it's a cooperative approach that we seek, rather than sort of either the association or the government trying to impose something from top down, because we don't think that's what work in the internet world. I'll tell you, one other aspect of that survey that we did that was really scary for us was we asked consumers, well, if the content on your service was heavily censored,
Mm-hmm.
what would you do?
Mm-hmm.
And 80% of Filipinos said they would
Mm-hmm.
either cancel their subscriptions to the service,
Mm-hmm.
or reduce their consumption and try to reduce their payments, or look on the internet for pirated versions. And
Why am I not surprised?
I'm not surprised either, but the survey really showed it. And that last statement, go look on the internet for pirated versions, racked up a 61% score. That's a commercial threat to us, we think.
Of course, yeah.
And it's a potential problem.
Mm-hmm.
And we think it's also a threat to sort of government's regulatory goals
Mm-hmm.
in producing a cleaner internet. Because if people, abandon, and this is a much bigger problem in some other countries, not so much in the Philippines, I
Mm-hmm.
want to say. But, some countries have very heavy censorship. People abandon the legitimate services and go look for everything online. And then they're seeing, everything imaginable, including some very, very, unsafe, undesirable content. So we have to meet the consumers where they're going. You said it so well a few minutes ago, that old era has changed, and we've got to evolve new approaches that both create a safer environment and allow the industry, the legitimate industry, to compete actively with the pirated, no rules, no holds barred services.
It's what it took us time, John. I mean, from the time we met with the content providers, that it took us time to sort of finalize the draft, because we wanted to, to sort of be creative in showing the stakeholders that, this is not censorship, and we're not going to, and at the same time, protect, the Filipino culture, and to make sure that the audience that we want to protect is protected. So I kept on repeating myself that we're not going to censor you. You're still going to be able to watch, what you are watching on Netflix or iWant, and all the video on demand providers. And I also told them that I'm thankful to you guys, because you're actually willing to cooperate with us. In fact, that's the reason why you're asking us what our guidelines are.
Exactly. I think we're in agreement on the way forward. And after the interview, we can talk about when we actually move.
Yes, actually, yes. I think
implementing. We're happy to work online. We work by Zoom nowadays, so we don't have to wait until things, the pandemic is over.
But I love us to go there to Hong Kong, actually.
Yeah. Well, I want to go to Manila.
So,
I watch the TV dramas from the Philippines, and I miss the music scene, I'll tell you. Anyway.
But do you, as you said that you, how do you like the Filipino content?
So I have lived in a lot of different places in my life, and one thing that strikes me about Philippine content is it is very romantic, very emotional. And in this respect, I think it's similar to what you might find in Latin cultures. And I've noticed that some of the numbers for some of the Filipino content are quite high in Latin America and in Southern Europe. But and so I think there are differences in cultures that come out in the content that way. I mean, you don't see that level of romanticism in Northern European content, right? The other thing is the musicality. You know, Filipino is a language that, in my opinion, lends itself very well to being sung. And you have always been a nation, and we're well, always, I don't know, way back when, but since I've been around, it's a nation of music. And I think that comes out in the best productions too. Now, you know, there's a lot of cheap productions where they can't afford good music, but the ones where they can, you know, that's just great stuff.
But I think, you know, my observation, the new content that some of the, you know, Filipino content providers that they're going to launch is quite different already. I mean, it's not anymore like the rom-com that, you know, people are expecting, and actually it's good, right? I mean, they're evolving.
Try something new, and evolve, right?
Yes.
Exactly.
Have you dealt with cases wherein government agencies ask or demand to take down titles, content, and have you?
So as an association, no. But if a government is concerned about a specific title, they normally wouldn't come to us. They would go directly to the service that has that title. And I know that some governments have gone to services. Netflix actually publishes now a transparency report. And I think they said they had 8 requests in Asia for takedowns of specific content, of which 5 came from Singapore. I don't remember. I doubt there are any from the Philippines on there. I haven't heard about any, but it does happen, and you know, the companies then have to deal with that. Some of the content has been amended or taken down. There's no doubt about that from some of the country markets.
Did your, you know, just curious, did your viewership subscription increase during the pandemic here in the Philippines?
I don't have. Let me look and see if I have the numbers. My answer is yes. That the video on demand industry in the Philippines has been growing in both of its legs. We describe it as having 2 legs. There's the subscription side and the advertising side. And the revenues from both of those have been rising and rose sharply in the last year. Subscriptions, yes, but also advertising. And right now, the revenues for the Philippines are divided about half and half. Which is, you know, a specificity of the Philippines. If you were to look at Australia, you would find a lot more weighting on the subscription side. And it's because people in the Philippines, maybe their disposable income is not as high. For whatever reason, they're much more interested in viewing content, and they don't mind viewing some advertising if they don't have to pay for the content. So that model is growing rapidly in the Philippines. So the answer to your question is really both legs grew in 2020. The subscription part, I think over the whole year, we'd say the subscription part more rapidly than the advertising part, but both are growing.
What are the what's the process or criteria in selecting locally produced content?
Yeah, good question. And I'm not a person who's involved in that, and my tastes are probably not the same as everybody else's. You know, what I would like to do is set up a conference where you can talk to some of the people who are producing locally, so procuring locally produced content, because Netflix has a regional staff, and Disney now has one as well, and HBO has been procuring some local productions. So you know, they can tell you what they're looking for. You know, they want my reaction is they want relatable stories
Mhm.
that are broadly relatable to people
Yeah.
everywhere, and good production quality.
Yeah.
You know, let's organize with the
Yes.
people who actually
I'd
do
love
that,
that. I'd love
because
that. Um,
I'm a consumer. I'm a consumer, not a producer of programming.
no, I mean, what are your thoughts on piracy? I mean, like you mentioned earlier, what are the steps that the association is taking to prevent it? Right.
So that is, you're quite right to ask about that. That is our other big
Mhm.
concern. We have established something called the Coalition Against Piracy, which is active all around Southeast Asia in particular. Our association works with local associations and local companies in quite a number of different countries. One of our big focuses, one of the tools that we think is most effective, is when there are pirate websites or pirate services which are kind of blatantly operating.
Mhm.
We're not talking about the occasional piece of pirated content on Daily Motion or something like that. We're talking about a whole service whose commercial reason for existence is to distribute stolen programming. And there are plenty of those.
They are.
What we think governments ought to do is to prevent those piracy syndicates, which are, by the way, international, because for the most part, they're not located in country. They're located
Mhm.
in the Ukraine or China or someplace beyond the reach of law.
Mhm.
And what we want governments to do is prevent those services from accessing Filipino consumers or Indonesian consumers or others, and work with internet service providers to institute denial of access, or as it's commonly called, site blocking. In
Actually,
Indonesia,
yeah.
Indonesia, for example, in the last year, we've done waves of blocking because there were very large syndicates that were preying on, if I can use that word, Indonesian consumers, using pirated content as the leader to suck in the consumers to websites where they were then surrounded by advertising for illegal gambling and pornography.
We attended a conference with Attorney Anne in London. That's also where I met the Chief Content Officer of Netflix, Mr. Ted Sarandos, and they were discussing, aside from other issues, that the piracy and also the fake news, it's really a worldwide problem.
It is.
It is.
It is.
Yes.
It is. And so in the Philippines, our goal, frankly, is to see the government work on setting up a system where, again, work with the ISPs to deny these pirate services access to the Philippine market. We're working with Globe and with
Yes.
some others, and the Intellectual Property Office of the Philippines and the Department of ICT, hopefully to get some legislative approaches that will allow us to deal with that. Because yeah, piracy is the plague. It's the pandemic of the content industry.
You're correct. What's your, and this is another question. They're curious. What's your favorite online series aside from the one playing in your own platform?
Well, since I don't have a platform, I can be neutral. My favorite online series. I'm gonna be honest and say Game Boys. Which is,
okay.
And I don't say that only because it's a Pinoy production, but because I regard it as frankly a monument to what can be achieved under adverse circumstances. In the pandemic, they made this video with great music, and it's almost like a rom-com, but it's not, because it's got the characters face real challenges in their lives, and high quality acting, high quality production. So, and after that one, I would say Game of Thrones. These are very different kinds of productions, but I do enjoy the fantasy genre
Yes.
In general, I read fantasy books, and I read the George R.R. Martin books before I watched Game of Thrones. So those would be my my two favorites. They're very, very different.
But in the next 5 years, how do you see the platform evolving in the next 5 years?
In the next 5 years, I think the turbulence caused by the pandemic will settle down, and we'll return to a more normal path. And this gets back to technological development and network development. That normal path is going to include continuing rollouts of 4G services to additional parts of the Philippines, which is going to bring the possibility of accessing online video to more people in the provinces. And I think that probably starting in about 2023, you'll begin to see commercially significant 5G services actually established and operating. It's going to take a while to get there, because not only do the telcos have to invest, but consumers have to invest in new handsets to enjoy the benefits of the 5G technology. And so I don't think, because of those needs for investments and also the economic damage that we're now suffering from the pandemic, I think that process will be a little more gradual than everybody has anticipated. But that is going to gradually increase the addressable audience and the audience that wants to consume online video. So for our industry, I foresee a return to a more stable growth path, and that growth path continuing for the next 5 years.
I have a lot of questions from our netizens, but I chose a few. First question is, do you still go to cinemas to watch films?
I do. And, for me, for a full-length production, okay, one of the things that we're seeing in online content is people are experimenting with different formats, different lengths, everything from 10-minute episodes to hour-long episodes. I like watching a full-length movie in the cinema. If you don't have all the distractions, it's usually a very good quality sound system.
And it's still a different experience.
It is.
I mean, being there. Yes.
And I'm frustrated. The cinemas here are closed now. They have been for months.
Same here.
Yeah. And I'm looking forward to the day when they reopen, because, I think I'm probably pretty typical. I don't consume content in one way only. I like going to the cinema. I like watching a good video at home. I do not particularly enjoy watching videos on airplane screens. That's always my bad example of how to watch a video on a tiny screen with low resolution and lousy sound system. No.
Yes. Thank you very much for joining us, John. We are grateful that you have accepted the invitation. And I'm so happy that finally our audience has put a face on behind the streaming services we are subscribed to. To our audience, if you have comments, questions, or suggestions for future topics and episodes, we would be happy to hear from you. You can follow us on our Facebook page, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, MTRCB UNCUT. This has been Chairperson Rachel Arenas. Stay safe, everyone, and see you again next week.